We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a blessing and gift from God. Nehemiah is an example of a political leader who remained faithful to God and his purposes. He had a great passion for God's people, and for the nation to be in a right relationship with the Lord. Nehemiah didn't seek to rule by brute force. He realized that if Israel was going to do a work for God, it had to come from a willing heart. Our lesson refers to Nehemiah as a restoring builder, and as such he had to be a motivator. Being able to inspire people to pursue God's will, is the secret of true leadership, and this is not possible unless the leader is dedicated to the cause. And let's not forget, it all started with prayer, Nehemiah 2:11. Our lesson begins with verse 11. After Sanballat and Tobiah heard that Nehemiah was coming to check on the welfare of the people in Judah, Nehemiah 2:10. Our first verse says, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days. After getting both the permission and the assistance from King Artaxerxes, Nehemiah set out for Jerusalem. When he arrived, Nehemiah didn't hurry into action immediately. He said that he was in the city 3 days before he did anything. We can learn an important lesson from Nehemiah's life. Whenever possible, we should take time to prayerfully consider any situation before we act. In Nehemiah's case, his waiting period gave him a chance to come up with a plan of action. Verse 2 says, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. When Nehemiah did decide that it was time to act, he got up during the night, in the company of only a few men, and taking only the animal he rode on, to indicate that he didn't want to call attention to what he was doing. He did not want to reveal his plan to rebuild Jerusalem's walls and gates, until he was absolutely ready. Verse 3 says, By night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Nehemiah began to make a survey of Jerusalem. He wanted to know exactly how much was needed to be done before he brought any proposal to the people. Nehemiah started surveying the damage from the west side of Jerusalem, the valley gate toward the jackal well. This led him to the dung gate, the garbage dump for Jerusalem, which was located at the southern tip of the city and about 500 yards from the valley gate. Nehemiah inspected the walls that were broken down, and the gates that had been destroyed by fire. Verse 14 says, Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. Nehemiah continued his survey of the city by going to the fountain gate, which probably refers to En-Rogel, a spring situated where the Hinnom and Kidron valleys meet. Of course, access to water was a crucial issue for any city. When Nehemiah reached the gate of the fountain, he came to the king's pool, believed to be the pool of Siloam associated with King Hezekiah, where Jesus would direct a leper he was healing. As Nehemiah tried to travel up the eastern side of the city, he undoubtedly encountered a great deal of debris and rubble, which hindered his progress so much that there wasn't enough room for his donkey to get through. Verse 15 says, So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. At this point, Nehemiah must have continued on foot since there was not enough room for his donkey. While it was still dark, Nehemiah said, Then I went up in the night by the brook, which was the Kidron brook. The Kidron Valley separated Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives to the east. John 18:1 tells us that Jesus crossed this brook on the way out of Jerusalem to Gethsemane. After he inspected the wall near the brook, Nehemiah said he turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. This seems to indicate that at this point, Nehemiah went back for his donkey, and re-entered the city by the gate of the valley on the west side, the same way he had come. Verse 16 says, The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Nehemiah emphasized that the leaders in Jerusalem had no idea about what he was doing. He was very thorough on making this point, for he mentions every possible part of the population. It's not exactly clear who the rulers were. Evidently, the people had selected certain men to govern the city. The term Jews refers to the citizens of Jerusalem. The priests and the nobles represented the spiritual and social leaders. Of course, the phrase "the rest that did the work" refers to the people who would do the actual work of building the wall. The point here is that for the time being, Nehemiah continued to keep his plan secret. Verse 17 says, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." When the time was right, Nehemiah revealed why he had come to Jerusalem. In order to arouse action on an issue, a leader must first convince the people that a problem exists, and then get them to focus on it. Nehemiah began describing the bad situation the people were in. They were weak and vulnerable to attack. Nehemiah was well aware, and the people should have been also, that it was impossible to carry on a normal life, with the basic elements of their city destroyed. He continued to describe their distressful situation by reminding them that although the temple had been repaired in 515 BC, yet Jerusalem itself was still a lot of rubble. In light of their distressful situation, Nehemiah appealed to the people's sense of pride. Because the city was in ruins, the people were considered a disgrace by their neighbors who treated them disrespectfully and hurled insults at them, because of their weakened condition. Nehemiah's point was that if the people worked together, this state of affairs would end. Unspoken here, but surely understood by the people, was that Israel's condition made their God an object of disgrace as well. Working to rebuild the walls would be a way of glorifying God. Verse 18 says, "I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me, and what the king had said to me. They replied, 'Let us start rebuilding.' So they began this good work." In order to encourage the people, Nehemiah told them about how God had blessed him in his efforts to help Jerusalem. He didn't take any credit for himself, all the credit was given to the hand of God. Nehemiah also shared the people what the king told him. God had also directed the royal approval for the project. Sharing the words with the people that the king spoke to him probably served two purposes. First, it would reassure them that what Nehemiah was proposing was authorized by the mighty king of Persia. Second, and even more important, the fact that the king of Persia would be behind Nehemiah's efforts, was strong proof of God's mighty hand at work on behalf of his people. As a result of Nehemiah's appeal to the people, their despair turned to hope, and the impossible dream was a reality within reach. So the people said, "Let us rise up and build." So they went about this good work with great vigor. They picked up on Nehemiah's lead and encouraged one another. Verse 19 says, "But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us." "What is this you are doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" Whenever God's people begin to take action for the Lord, it's not surprising that enemies will come out. Experiencing opposition and difficulties does not necessarily mean we are doing something wrong. It could mean just the opposite. Here, Nehemiah says, "But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed at us, to scorn, and despised us." Naming these men indicates that Nehemiah and Judah were virtually surrounded by enemies, Sanballat to the north, Tobiah to the east, and Geshem to the south, and the Ashdodites who lived on the Philistine plain to the west of Jerusalem. When these three opposition leaders heard about the people attempting to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, they laughed and despised the people, and their efforts to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. They were hoping to discourage the workers. This is often the way it is with God's enemies. They seek to instill fear and doubt. These men also threatened to make trouble when they asked, "Will you rebel against the king?" They were referring to Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, who they didn't know had authorized this mission. Our final verse says, "I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We his servants will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. Nehemiah responded to the attacks from their opposition with great confidence. Nehemiah had requested success from God. Now he expressed confidence that the sovereign God of heaven will prosper the people, and they will complete the building program, no matter what these scoffers said. Nehemiah said, "These three men Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem had no basis to speak at all, because they had no share in Jerusalem. Nor did they have any right or historic claim to the city." In essence, Nehemiah was telling these three men that they had no inheritance in Judah. God had given the land to Israel and he would watch over his people. Nehemiah, the Hebrew cupbearer of the Persian king, had a strong desire to rebuild Jerusalem. God granted him the opportunity to request from the king authorization and materials to complete the task. Upon arriving at the broken city of Jerusalem, Nehemiah assessed the situation and then encouraged the people to begin construction. Nehemiah had turned his heart's desire into positive action. All around us there are broken walls of relationships that need mending in the name of the Lord. As God's people, we should be like Nehemiah, looking to be restoring builders, who build broken walls and transform our God-given concerns into constructive ministries. What broken down walls do we see around us, and in us? Walls that God meant for our spiritual protection, which have been neglected and leave us vulnerable. Walls of prayer, walls of devotion to God, walls of time spent in His Word. Walls of witnessing to others, walls of encouraging our family, walls of strengthening our church. What do the broken walls of the testimony of God look like around us in Christ's church? What God puts in our hearts does not have to be shared immediately with everyone, Nehemiah 2:11-12. It's never wise to jump into a work or ministry without first learning the nature and scope of the work, Nehemiah 2:13-16. God shows us needs, but also supplies plans and leaders to meet those needs, Nehemiah 2:17-18. Wherever God is at work, there will be opposition, Nehemiah 2:19. If we know we are in God's will, there is nothing to fear from others, Nehemiah 2:20. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this week's lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. We wish you can join us at the Kubau Church of Christ soon. Our congregation is a place to discover faith, find new friends, grow closer relationship with Christ and serve with each other's gifts. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.